You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
All right, folks, we continue to discuss shoe supply chains because mainly it's sucking all the air out of the room and all the profits out of the room with it at the same time, Matt. So obviously it was kind of serendipitous that we did our shoe supply chain summit at the time that we did. We didn't, when we planned it earlier in the year, we didn't realize that we were going to have a mass resurgence of demand, and then that mass resurgence of demand was going to come across at the same time where we didn't have enough ships and the costs were increasing and all these things. So obviously the Shoe Supply Chain Summit helped a lot of companies go a little bit deeper. All those insights are on shoesupplychainsummit.com that you can go back and purchase access for all the expert interviews. We are pulling a few things out of the vault to help people right now, though. So this one is a panel discussion that I actually held on key strategies to navigate the supply chain chaos. And it featured Farrell Morris from Farrell Robin Footwear, Joe Passio from Fila, Jim Salzano for Jones and Vining, and Dr. Noah Hasegaba from the Port of Long Beach. So different segments, Matt: fashion, sneakers, lasts, and a supplier, and as well as the port. It was a really robust conversation. Everybody had different viewpoints from the supply chain, which I thought was really interesting, and I think makes for really good conversation. So let's just tee it up right now, and we'll come back on the back end and have a discussion. More people coming in. Great. Welcome, everybody, to today's panel. Thank you for joining us today on the 2021 Shoe Supply Chain Summit, which is the hottest topic by far in our industry. Full of hot topics, I'd say, because before everybody hopped on, we were just having a discussion about sustainability and all the other challenges and retail issues and things like that the industry is facing today. But the supply chain summit that we're focusing on this year really is, and this is FDRA's kind of core mission, is to bring new ideas, obviously update everybody on what's happening. But if we can give you a couple of different ideas or new ways to do your business a little bit better than it was before, then we've accomplished our mission. So it really is about best practices, new ideas, anything that we can do to pull our heads up from looking at our desks a little bit and ponder a little bit in the sky about what's happening is good for business, I think. And today's panel is really fascinating. It's going to be fantastic because what we have is a group from different aspects of the industry. So I'm happy to introduce Farrell Morris with Farrell Robin Footwear. She's the founder and CEO. If you haven't heard her on our podcast, I would definitely encourage you to go to shoeandshow.com to listen to her story, which is fascinating. Follow her on LinkedIn. She posts often about the work that they're doing, not just on the footwear side, but on the social side, which I think is so important in their factories, and their whole mission to empower women through footwear is really inspiring. So happy to have her, and covering specifically, obviously when we have supply chain, we're all in the same boats and we're all doing the same things, but having it from a fashion footwear standpoint, I think is obviously important. We also have Joe Passio. He is the global footwear development and sourcing lead at Fila. If you don't know what Fila is, then I don't know what planet you're on. We were just talking earlier about Fila in the 90s and all the vibrant colors, and whether Joe's going to show up in one of those outfits to the Fanny event, cocktail party in New York in August. Hope to see everybody there. But Joe has been a mainstay at many of our events the past couple of years, speaking about different sourcing issues. And today we're excited to have him speak about the supply chain issues, especially out of China, where they source majority of their product from. We also have Jim Salzano, who is the CEO of Jones and Vining. I would also say Jim was also on our podcast as well. So you have to go back maybe a year or so to find that, where we were talking about lasts and issues around all the new innovations Jones and Vining is doing around last making, but also new components. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Jim about the supplier side to the factory base, and as they work on development with brands, what they're working on and focusing on around these supply chain issues. And so excited to have him. And then, of course, last but not least, Port of Long Beach, who has been a mainstay on our weekly calls, who've been supporting us for many, many years. Never dodge a bullet. Always hop on to share what's happening. Dr. Noel Hasegawa. He is the Deputy Executive Director and COO at the Port of Long Beach. And they have been behind the 8 ball for a long time now. But we appreciate them continuing to come on and share what's happening in real time and giving honest updates and setting honest expectations for our industry as we go through all this. So everyone, right off the bat, again, everybody is from different aspects and has different ideas based on where they're at. We've been, these buzzwords of agility and speed and pivots. We had Dr. Noel Hasegawa on a couple of weeks on the podcast, and we talked about prayer as a tool for supply chains right now, which I think, could never hurt. But really quickly do round robin. And Jim, I'll start with you, but what are you hearing from your partners? And what's been the main topic of conversation right now around supply chains?
Yeah, well, this week it's been some of the changes that are going on in Vietnam, actually. I mean, we have a weekly call, and today we just spent some time going over the first few days of 210 of our employees are now staying at the factory in Vietnam for the next 21 days in a facility that was designed for 4 people. So, that's really been the latest. It seems like this, COVID is disrupting things again, shutting, there's 53 factories that are shut down as of this morning. We are open, but there's quite a bit of, I guess I hate to say this, the only thing that's certain is uncertainty, but we've, over the last year, we've really gotten comfortable being prepared for just the next thing that we never expected. Over the last year, we've seen some amazing disruptions, but the resilience in teams, and you'll probably hear from me later on and throughout. It comes down to culture. It comes down to putting, in our company at least, putting people first and the business second. And when you do that, we've got a bunch of people who are really interested in solving problems for our partners and coming up with ideas around the world. So, but the greatest is what's going to happen over the next couple of months with COVID really interrupting things in Vietnam and Indonesia. So that's what we're seeing.
Great. Farrell, right off the bat, what are you guys talking about and seeing when it comes to your supply chains right now? What's been the latest topics of discussion?
We have always been really nimble and quick. With that being said, it's always been really important for us to play the long game and do things the right way and what feels right. So, when we start talking about supply chain and negotiation, it is really always a focus of ours to think creatively. Fighting with pricing and timing, beating any member of your partnership up doesn't make sense to us. So, because the bulk of our business is private label, we have to ensure that our retailers or our brands are getting the absolute best quality for the best price, knowing that they have thresholds and margin requirements, and at the same time, making sure that our partners feel like we're being respectful and thoughtful as well. And how do we best do that? And for us, we have really focused on technology and evolution. And how do we think more creatively? How do we think leaner? How do we communicate more efficiently? How do we mitigate waste that ultimately goes into costing of shoes? And how do we just create development processes that benefit everybody that we work with? Because winning at the expense of one of your partners is not a long-term strategy. So really creatively thinking about new technologies and tools is really where we've been focused for the last 18 months, especially during COVID.
Great. Joe, I'll bring you into the recent discussions you guys have been having around cost issues, speed issues, capacity issues.
For us, it's really around shipping. Shipping has been the latest problem. I mean, the costs continue to rise, and they rise above an area that is just comfortable and where you're able to absorb. So you have to get very creative to be able to figure that problem out and deliver goods and get them here on time. So that's been the biggest challenge. And across the whole supply chain, there's issues and fires. It seems like every week there's something new popping up. And when it was like just tariffs, it was a problem. We thought that was like the end of the world, as things were going up. And at that point in time, you're thinking, God, I hope this is the worst of it. And then you get hit with something like this, and it's just every day it's something different. You just take the challenge and fight through it day by day. So.
That's good. And I think it was interesting, and I'll bring in Dr. Hasegawa in just a second, but I do want to know, we talked about this on our kickoff yesterday, but the positivity that I just heard from 3 individuals about leaning into the problems, right? Trying to solve problems. I think some of this holistically is cultural in a company, building that capacity, building the thoughts, having leaders that encourage and say, okay, it is a problem. It's not the end of the world. We can figure it out. Let's think things through and push on with it, and get to the next stop. And I do want to pick up on what Jim was saying about what's happening in Vietnam, because we have seen Dr. Hasegawa, we saw record influx of all these products coming in. So we start seeing people get, jabbed with COVID vaccinations, and people start going out and they're like, I want product of all types. So all this flood comes in. And we were just talking before we hopped on, and you said there's a little bit of a softening happening because of, the cases are rising in Asia, and there's capacity issues and there's shipping issues. So maybe really quickly, can you give us just a real quick snapshot of what's happening in real time at the port? What are you seeing in terms of import coming in, and what are you planning for the next couple of months?
Sure. I think Joe said it best, right? It's a series of putting out fires, and every day presents a new challenge that we have to overcome. But, for us at the port, we're ground zero. Everything that Joe and Jim and Farrell described and mentioned, we feel the effects downstream. So what we're doing here, Andy, is we're trying to manage as best we can, try to get the container off the ship as quickly as possible. Our cargo volumes sometimes make that a little more challenging than ordinary times. And we've been on this record surge since July of last year. The only reprieve is last month, and that's because of what's happening in South Asia, in South China. But we expect things to pick up again at the end of July and early August. 2020 was a record year for us, and all indications are that 2021 will be another record year. In fact, between the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach combined, we're looking at 20 million container units. We've never seen anything like it. So we are doing what we can as a port authority to introduce solutions, whether it's making 49 acres of available land at the port to serve as a staging site and provide relief to the terminals, working with our terminals in Long Beach to expedite containers carrying PPE, COVID-related supplies, making sure that they're maximizing dual transactions. And more importantly, for all of your members, is maximizing gate hours, trying to inject that flexibility that everyone needs during these times. So that's in a snapshot what's happening, what we're doing, and how we're looking at things right now.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about how we foresee a record back to school year. Obviously, most of the imports for that have already come in, hopefully, from footwear companies and retailers. But as we look to holiday 2021, how are you guys planning for that? Because there's an assumption that people are a little bit worried about costs, capacity, getting it in on time. So do you guys foresee what your normal period would be of ramping up? Is it going to be earlier this year to prepare for that?
Well, we thought if you asked me this question at the beginning of this year or late last year, I would have said that we would begin to see a softening in the summer. We haven't seen that at all. We expect this surge that commenced last summer to continue through Chinese New Year, right? So I think that notwithstanding some of the headwinds on the cost side, there's a lot of demand. In fact, we're seeing services, Andy, that we've never seen in the Trans-Pacific. We're seeing container lines that are typically in the inter-Asia market. They're making their way here. It just demonstrates and reflects how much demand there is for transportation overseas. And that's notwithstanding record spot rates, right, and record rates. So we don't see that at all. All indications based on our conversations with the shipping lines and with the BCOs is that the volume will continue, and this surge will continue to Lunar New Year next year.
Great. Joe, you were talking about the prices in particular, and I want to get into that a little bit with you. Are you guys seeing any crunch in terms of inventory? Obviously, everybody's seeing the same thing in terms of spot rates and costs from the shipping. But I'm interested just seeing what you guys are seeing on the inventory side, and then also, how you're navigating those cost issues. Is it just one of those things where you have to grin and bear the cost, or are you finding new ways to try to move product around in different places?
Yeah, from the costing perspective, it's going up on the shipping side, as I mentioned earlier, as well as on the raw material side, which is affecting ultimate FOBs. So the main thing for us was first understanding what the real number was, because as the factories are throwing costs back at you, it could be a very large number. And for us, it was really getting to a very comfortable negotiated percentage increase and understanding that's really what is true. We were able to, access the information, obviously, with the FDRA's help. On the weekly calls, we see the percents are going up in all the different raw materials. So we were aware that something was going on early on, and we were able to work with factories individually, one by one, and it's shoe by shoe, and get to the point where we need to. Pricing it's a difficult thing, and it's a factory by factory, supplier by supplier, conversation. But as I said, most important was understanding what the real cost increase should be, and then work towards that.
Yeah, and you guys primarily are sourcing in China. I know you have done some in Vietnam as well. But when you look at some of the port issues that are there in Asia, have you guys faced any severe logistical issues at the ports that you're shipping out of?
Yeah, the biggest thing is just getting containers. That's been probably the most difficult thing. We have contracts obviously with forwarders and steamliners, and it's those things are set up, but you only get to a certain point. As you get above those contracts, it gets really difficult. You have to find space, and you have to find containers. We would have space booked on containers, and then or on the vessels, and then don't have a container. So lots of challenges with that, and one of the few things you can do is plan. Just obviously give yourself more time to get these things accomplished, and look for other resources. And there's not just one forwarder out there. There's a lot of different people out there who can provide resources, and you just have to mine it and work it. And you need time for that too. If you give yourself a week to finish a product and get it on a boat, you're gonna be in a world of problems. It's just not going to happen that fast. But finding containers and getting that vessel space at a great price has been a giant challenge. And like I said, planning and timing has probably been our best weapon at this point.
And how have the conversations been with your retail partners, where you're explaining these costs and trying to figure out the balance?
They're fantastic. They take the cost increases, no problem. Yeah, they're very generous, and no, it's again, we have some great retail partners, and we talk through it and try to find somewhere where we can all be happy, as any negotiation would be. Yeah. But certainly, it's happening across the board in both the countries we source from, and so it's something that you have to address with your retail partners. It's not something you can take 100% on yourself. So
okay. Here, I'll bring you in, because I think when we started off the round, Robin, you were talking a lot about, and this is so important, and we try to encourage people this, because I think it's so, when you talk about container rates going up and container shortages and port issues and all that, it takes all the air out of the room, and it kind of makes you focus on those things solely, instead of looking at things holistically to say, could we change our operations to find cost reductions and find speed? So I'm really interested in what you guys have been talking about, obviously, because supply chain costs have increased so much in the last several months because demand increased. But what have your conversations been, even during COVID, about looking at operations differently? I think, are we at the point where all these things keep happening and we just need to change how we just think about making footwear, developing footwear?
I think if we don't change, we're not going to survive. And I think there's never been a more exciting and challenging, and I find the challenge incredibly exciting, because we in fact do look at footwear very holistically, starting with the lasts and going through the entire development process. And it's a long process. And again, going back to our conversation earlier, information is power. Do you know how to correct a pattern in a way that is more cost effective? Do you know how to purchase materials that allows you to amortize costs? Do you know how to share design or last development that helps you amortize costing throughout the system? Can we be expansive in our country of production process that not only lends itself to being less vulnerable? Frankly, vulnerability, I think, was one of the scariest things that we learned this season, that something like a pandemic happens and the implications are enormous. And how do we diversify that risk or mitigate production risks, and what are the advantages? And it's really like going back to the very beginning and saying, how are we going to slice this pie to help ensure our mission of creating a win-win world in terms of empowerment? And there's so many different places. We're really fortunate. We have a very diversified retailer and brand base. And we have always thought in terms of customization in how their consumers consume. What is the value to a consumer? Is it comfort? Is it color? Is it design? Is it cost? And it's everywhere from a $15 retail price point to the hundreds. And it has allowed us the experience to understand sort of the wins and loses of each piece of the process, and bringing in, again, going back to these technologies that can really put together, have large impact on the decision-making process. So we look at it holistically. We understand that there are certain retailers we can work with that we can plan differently, but we also know we have the option to plan upfront versus back end. Do we start production differently? Do we create it in two different countries of production to diversify that risk? Do we work with the calendars of our retailers and try to do the best we can to give them the time and the flexibility that they need to feel comfortable and intensify the back end of it? So it's really, I actually think, one of been the most creative thinking years in a very long time. And I don't think that is a systematic change that's going to change. I think outside the box thinking creatively, finding the best direct lines to the values that work. So there's a lot of different ways to slice the pie. Yeah.
Let me ask you just short-term mentality. When you look at holiday 2021 coming up, are you guys planning, Joe mentioned, plan ahead, give yourself more time. Are you guys doing the same thing? Are you bringing product earlier than you normally would this year?
So we're really fortunate that we don't inventory goods. The 90+% of our business is FOB, and that falls on our retailers. With that being said, it is our job to ensure our retailers do the best job they can possibly do. So yes, we have addressed calendar shifts while trying to respect a flexibility need. And again, a big part of our business is within the fashion industry, and that is, how do we decrease production times? How do we create countries of production that are diversified so maybe they're closer, which also works with our sustainability impact? Mm-hmm. But yes, everybody is looking at planning, and we have the luxury of looking at it from a 3D designed last library that we keep on board, and how do we transfer the technology or the information digitally and create end-to-end digital processes that allow us to be as lean and responsive as we possibly can.
Yeah, and what are the conversations with the factories going when you're explaining the demand explosion? I'm sure they're very happy to have the orders, but I'm sure they're getting orders from a lot of people at the same time.
They are. There's also capacity issues because the workforce has been affected. There's a random, one town sees an increase in COVID, and everybody is required to stay at home. And we have long-term partners. When we talk about things like the expectation is that we're working, in a 3D digital format at all times, and we can eliminate 3 steps in the design process in pattern making because we're communicating in a form of 3D, and we have to put less product on ships or samples, and we can make it up in other places. But our partners are our family. We do it, some days you get the bear, some days bear gets you. we're playing a long-term game. We're not playing a finite game, and we work together to make the wins.
Awesome. Jim Farrell was talking a lot about Last. Do you guys know anything about Last? I'm kidding.
What are those?
We're very privileged to have Jim on.
Process, Jim. So,
I'm excited to hear Jim's take on things, because they're, as a component supplier to factories, I think there's a whole supply chain challenges around that. So we definitely want to hear about that, Jim, but also from your experience as an executive running shoe business as well, what would you advise people when they're thinking about these topics and these cost issues? How do you look at it? Because I think you're such a good leader in terms of culture and encouraging people and molding people and getting the most out of people. So, first right off the bat, just what are some of the challenges you guys are seeing as a component supplier to factories and to brands right now in this environment?
First of all, Andy, thank you for being able to read my writing on all the nice things to say about me. I really appreciate that. I don't know where you got that idea about culture. But, we were talking about it a little bit earlier that, it really comes down to leadership. I mean, I'm going to go through a few tactical things, but leadership by definition is facing unprecedented issues. You're at the head of the pack, and you're usually blazing a new trail. And fortunately, in this company, when I've been on the board of this company since 2014, a lot of my time was spent at Clark's and half of my career at retail, starting in the stockroom. And, Tom Iredale was supposed to be on the call today. There are people probably dropped off the call already when they saw it was me and not Tom. And, but Tom was one of the people we'd call when we couldn't figure it out at Clark's on our own, or Easy Spirit when I was there. I mean, we've got massive experience in this company. What I would consider some of the icons in the business. We've got great teams around the world. And what we've been doing over the last couple of years is kind of taking the playbook from the brand side and the retail side and positioning the way we approach partners like their retailers and like their customers on the selling floor, and really getting focused on making sure we're doing everything possible to help them achieve their objectives. Now, we make lasts. We've been doing that for 90 years. We would say that, every one of those is a customized solution, because every brand is different around fit and aesthetic. And then we have decided over the last couple of years to take a lot of our production in-house and simplify the assortment. Again, just trying to reduce the complexity. While, I was fortunate enough to spend some time at Zappos and learned a lot about the paradox of choice. Tony used to talk about this. And I looked at our product line when we got here, and we decided to focus on our last business and our material business. We had a great footbed business. We rebranded it under Perfex. Perfex is everything we're doing under Perfex now has a sustainable element to it. We're not doing anything that doesn't have some kind of eco element to it. And what we're finding is that all happened at the same time this pandemic hit, and the brands were beginning to focus on the impact of the shift in the way consumers were shopping. But all of a sudden, the online environment exponentially increased, and fit and comfort became paramount to not just reducing returns, but the key is, because it's okay to be able to return something as a consumer, but what the brand really is seeking is consumer loyalty. So now, as a consumer, I know if I order a 10.5, it's going to fit, and I don't have to worry about returning 2 out of 3 pair. This is the key. And so in Jones and Vining, our lasts and our footbeds and our lining materials, through Perfex, touch really 5 of the decision points a consumer has to make whether or not they're going to actually buy the shoe. And they don't purchase the shoe until they decide to keep it. It's not when they buy it online. It's when they put it on, they step up, it fits, it feels comfortable underfoot. And this is the selling experience on the selling floor. You've sold the shoe when they start walking around in it. But the benefit then is I had a back room to go back and forth to get the right fit and the right brand. So brands are focusing more than ever on development and fit and comfort. They've invested much more at the front end. And Jones and Vining, we span from the designer all the way through to production. So we're dealing with the designer, and a lot of our brands are located in the US, but we're seeing decision-making being decentralized into the product creation centers in Vietnam, Indonesia, and China. And then we work closely with the T1s. And what we've done, the biggest thing, I wish I had, some kind of sophisticated consultant speak kind of thing here to tell you, but we've decentralized decision-making. When I got in here, clearly I didn't know nearly, what this team knew about lasts and materials. And when the pandemic hit, the first thing I said is, I don't have all the answers, and I don't even have all the questions. So we work together as one team across 3 different countries. And I trust people. We trust each other. We're like this team that if the ball drops, we don't point fingers. We pick the ball up and help that player up, and we move it down the field. And it's all because we're focused on what's going on with the partners. So over the last couple of years, by bringing production in-house, by focusing on footbeds and lasts, taking direct aim at fit and comfort, turning samples around in 24 days, not charging for these, nickel and dime kind of services. We love to have last production. We love to have footbed production. Our business has exploded in footbeds, and we've added capacity. I mean, in the last 3 years, we've probably spent nearly $15 million, which is probably not a lot for companies on this call, but for Jones, it wouldn't be a lot at Clark's. We would spend that in about a half a year on new stores. But here it's a big number, and we've invested in technology and capacity. We doubled our size in Vietnam, January of 2021. And but most importantly, we've invested in people. And it's that the investment in people has given us agility. If you want agility, you don't need to hire McKinsey to find out how to be agile. You just trust people to make decisions. And when they take risk, you give people permission to take risk. You reward them for that, and you learn from that. And so, I've got, we've got people working in Vietnam when I'm asleep just outside of Boston. They're making decisions, and they ask permission later. And we celebrate every one of those things. I mentioned earlier, we have 210 people that just moved into the factory in Vietnam. When I was told that the Vietnam government was suggesting that companies move their employees in for the next 21 days, I was like, how are we going to do that? But our team in Vietnam knew how to do it. And so because we're making open cell foam now, we made mattresses for every one of our employees that they're actually sleeping on now for the next 21 days. But the most important part of that is because they feel trusted. They committed to being away from their families for 21 days. That's longer than I've ever been away from my family. And so, with all that passion put together and the expertise we have and the support we have for each other, we're doing things with a focus on the partners that have sped up as they've sped up their process to mitigate some of the challenges we're having in logistics. And a lot of it just comes down to the work we did on the culture ahead of this pandemic. No idea this pandemic was coming, but fortunately.
Man, that was fascinating, Andy. The thought of even just manufacturing mattresses so Jim's team in Vietnam could stay quarantined for 21 days. These are stories that you don't get from Footwear News or other publications. This is the back end kind of stuff. And it just, again, shows you how agile and focused and motivated our industry is.
Yeah, so that was real talk. And obviously we trimmed half of it because it was an hour long and for time purposes for this. So for the next edition of that, we'll queue it up for next week, where you can hear the next half of this discussion on supply chain issues from these vantage points. A lot about how to look holistically at your supply chain and go back to the very beginning and reevaluate processes and try to find speed and new cost-saving opportunities. But again, we're at shoeandshow.com is the website. Go back to the whole catalog and catch up if you missed any episodes recently. But again, next week we'll pick up from where this left off on our kind of special supply chain series that we're putting out there to help everybody kind of hear some new ideas and maybe some new way forwards to help your company. So again, next week we'll pick it up. Until next time, please be safe, please be healthy, please keep wearing a mask if you need to, if you're in an area that you need to, please get the shot, please keep selling shoes, and until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.